Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Lauren. If you are new here, I am a licensed clinical social worker, board approved supervisor, and private practice owner. And today I'm talking about something that I continue to see come up in my practice. And I'm wondering if you have seen it too. I would imagine that you have, but I'm definitely curious on your take. So make sure you leave that in the comments below. But that is this growing rise of people who are self-diagnosing themselves as having an anxiety disorder. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But today we're actually going to get into what actually is generalized anxiety disorder and what to do if you suspect that this is something that a client may be struggling with. As always, nothing that I say on my channel should constitute clinical advice or clinical supervision or is in replacement of clinical supervision. Make sure that you're talking to your supervisors and seeking the needed support because you deserve to be supported. Okay, so why is this happening? Well, my take on this is with the rise of mental health information and education online and the amount of people who are talking about it on social media platforms, it's very easy for people to be scrolling and to see information in a very small video clip that sounds like something they may be experiencing, thoughts they may be having, and they immediately can go to a place of, well, maybe I have an anxiety disorder. And I think that as mental health professionals, we have a really, really important role, which is we need to be able to help people differentiate between what is a natural, normal human emotion or response to something versus you actually have a clinical disorder or diagnosis that needs further evaluation, further testing, and specific treatment to help you manage. Not everybody has an anxiety disorder just because they're reporting that they're anxious. And so, if someone is coming to you and they're saying that they have an anxiety disorder, I would really encourage you to make sure that you are curious about that specific disorder and ask questions related to, so how do you know that you have that disorder and who specifically diagnosed you with that? And let's talk about symptoms because we want to make sure that I, as the mental health professional, understand what does this mean to them and how might this be showing up in their daily life and do they actually meet the clinical diagnostic criteria for a generalized anxiety disorder or other related anxiety disorder. Now, keeping us from getting into the weeds on this because I want to make sure that this information is short and bite-sized pieces and easy to digest, I'm not going to be talking about the list of anxiety related disorders. And if you think that someone has an anxiety related disorder that's not generalized anxiety disorder, refer to the APA for more information and actually look at the specific criteria that's matching up for your clients. But today we're going to talk about how do you know the difference between this is regular, just you're experiencing anxiety in the moment versus you actually have generalized anxiety disorder. Now, let's talk about anxiety for just a brief moment because anxiety, like I mentioned, is a natural human experience. It's natural and normal to feel anxious in certain situations. And someone having bouts of anxiety over the course of their life doesn't actually mean that they have generalized anxiety disorder. Doesn't mean they don't, but it also doesn't conclusively say, yes, you have an anxiety disorder. I think a lot of people immediately take that and say, well, I'm continuing to feel anxious or I'm feeling really anxious and overwhelmed. And so I must have this diagnosis. And I really caution you on not taking that at face value if that's what clients are saying, and stay curious and ask more questions to better understand what's actually happening and going on for them. Anxiety is a natural human experience. I cannot say that enough. And so, you feeling anxious or a client feeling anxious at different periods in their life, which seems proportional to what they have going on or what they're experiencing, is normal. It is not an anxiety related disorder. But if someone is saying, I'm having persistent feelings of anxiety and I am starting to feel like that I might have an actual disorder because it's hard to manage and I just feel like that's impacting my life, then we go, okay, let's ask some more questions. So if a client is saying they have an anxiety disorder or you're suspecting that they have an anxiety disorder, the first thing we want to do is explore further. Now, what might they be saying that would cue you in on this? Let's talk about that really quick because anxiety can manifest in a number of ways. And some people might know that they have anxiety, and some people might not understand that specific things that they are experiencing actually could be generalized anxiety disorder. Again, there's so much information out there that sometimes people can be misinformed and not understand what is actually happening. And so we want to help them figure out what actually is happening and how to support them the best way that we can. So, with anxiety, if a client is exhibiting certain feelings, behaviors, or thoughts, there might be an indication that you need to explore further and see if they have a generalized anxiety disorder. Now, what does that look like? Well, feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge, someone saying that they are restless, fidgety, or have a hard time sitting still, someone who is reporting difficulty falling asleep at night, someone who has racing thoughts, difficulty controlling the thoughts that they have, intrusive, unwanted thoughts, or significant feelings of worry. Those are all indications that if someone is reporting that, there might be an anxiety related disorder happening. It also could look like someone is unable to cope with what we would say in the general sense of the world is a natural thing to be anxious about. If they're having a hard time coping with that and they are perseverating on that, they are having, thoughts that are taking them to worst case scenario. They're having a hard time regulating their emotions. They're experiencing feelings of doom and gloom, feelings of dread. They are having thoughts of something bad happening. This is all clues that there might be something else going on other than they're just having a natural reaction to the situation, which is anxiety. But for this purpose, we're specifically talking about a generalized anxiety disorder. And so, per the DSM, the generalized anxiety disorder needs to be symptoms that meet the criteria that they have been experiencing for at least 6 months. So, automatically, if you're seeing someone have anxiety related to something that is very specific, it's one or more instances in a very small amount of time, less than 6 months, then we could say you don't conclusively have generalized anxiety disorder, but it may be something that we want to really put a pin in and revisit at a later time if we feel like you are continuing to have these symptoms despite our interventions. More time has passed, you're not getting better, and we're starting to notice that maybe other symptoms are present or you're having a hard time just with day to day functioning. For a generalized anxiety disorder, we're seeing that we are having symptoms of anxiety and they are for at least 6 months. And it's not related to another medical concern, it's not related to another mental health disorder. It is specifically just generalized anxiety disorder. Now, if you are noticing these things that are cluing you in that someone might be having generalized anxiety disorder, there's actually a screening tool out there called the GAD-7, which is specifically measuring for generalized anxiety disorder symptoms. And the GAD-7 is going to be your best evidence based tool to quickly assess whether someone has generalized anxiety disorder. And this is something that they would fill out and that you would review and then score. And based upon that score, is going to talk about the severity of their symptoms and if they meet that criteria. Now, if someone is scoring very low and they're only maybe saying yes to one or two symptoms and it's not significantly, it's not impacting daily functioning, and it's below a 10, then I would say they likely have anxiety in the moment, but this wouldn't necessarily meet the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. We would want to explore further, maybe do additional testing, maybe screen them again at a later time to see are things changing, are they improving, to get more information to better understand what's actually happening. But if someone is scoring very high or they're scoring over 10, somewhere in that medium range, then it is a good indicator that they might have symptoms related to generalized anxiety disorder. Again, you're going to want to refer to your DSM to make sure that you're looking at all the criteria, you're ruling out any other disorders that it could be, and that it's not happening for any other reason other than what is in the criteria. But looking at the GAD-7 does a really good job of asking some very basic questions to help you understand and tease out what is general anxiety versus a generalized anxiety disorder. So we're looking at questions related to, do you feel anxious? Do you feel nervous, worried, or on edge? Do you feel restless? Do you find it's hard to sit still? It's also asking questions about worry. It's asking questions about irritability. It's asking questions about thoughts and managing those thoughts. And if someone's indicating yes, they have an option to say, I'm indicating that I have those symptoms almost every day, about half the time, or very rarely. And it's asking you only to look at over the past 2 weeks. And so this is where making sure that you're screening ongoing is important for a proper diagnosis, because if this is a one time screening over the past 2 weeks, that's a very small, narrowed view. And for someone who has actual generalized anxiety disorder, we're looking at these are persistent symptoms for a period of at least 6 months. And so we want to make sure that we're screening them repeatedly every so often to see, is this just a specific event that's happening in your life that's causing you to feel anxious, or is this ongoing that we might be teetering into clinical diagnostic criteria? And of course, when we're diagnosing somebody with generalized anxiety disorder, we also want to make sure that we're teasing out, is this anxiety, again, just normal, natural, you're feeling anxious given this situation, which is naturally anxiety producing, versus this is clinically impacting your ability to function as you would like. A lot of times we're not seeing people understand that piece. And this is where, as mental health professionals, we really have a role here, because I'm anxious about an upcoming test and I lost sleep and I felt very worried. And then I took the test and then afterwards the anxiety was gone. Well, that's not a generalized anxiety disorder. That is, you were anxious naturally so because this was important, this was worrisome, you might have thought you weren't going to do well. And so you were feeling that. You had a reaction, maybe mentally, emotionally, behaviorally, to that event, which subsided once the event was completed. It is not something that is persistent or ongoing. And so that is a really big difference between you just have anxiety because there's something anxiety producing in the moment versus you're actually meeting the clinical criteria for this disorder. And we need to move on forward and figure out, what do we need to do to help you, because this is clinically impacting you and it's probably going to continue unless you have support and treatment. Now, of course, this topic, like I said earlier, is multi-layered. There are lots of other anxiety-related disorders out there that someone could also be experiencing. And so when someone comes to you and they are reporting symptoms of anxiety, like I talked about earlier, it's good to stay curious and to really think about, is it something that they could be experiencing? Refer to the DSM and to see, do they meet the criteria, and do we maybe need to, on an ongoing basis, check in, reevaluate, do further testing, send them to have further testing done to make sure that this is exactly what's happening, and reassess as needed. It's absolutely okay to have several interactions with a client and still not be completely sure what that diagnosis is. You do not have to immediately slap on a diagnosis and say, this is the only diagnosis that they have. I'm concrete in that 100% and I'm never going to change. That's not that's not how it goes. You don't have to do that. You're allowed to have your diagnosis evolve and change over time, because clients evolve and change over time. And what they might be reporting to you in the first or second session might have a lot more clarity when they're saying something in the 10th or 12th session. So it's okay to not have this information immediately concrete, set in stone. But my hope is that this gives you just some general ideas and understanding of what generalized anxiety could look like and what are some key things to look for if you have a client who is expressing anxiety symptoms, and how to also kind of tease out what is general anxiety versus you actually have the clinical disorder. I'm genuinely curious if you have seen in your practice where people are self reporting or self diagnosing that they have anxiety when it's actually something different, or it is something that they are getting a very small snapshot into in scrolling and social media or what have you, but with further clarification, it's actually something else. Leave that information below in the comments, and I hope that this was helpful for you. As always, make sure you subscribe and follow along so that you never miss anything. And until next time, bye guys.